Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero, the show that revolutionizes personal engagement in the world and fortification of your life. Let's get to it. We're brought to you by Fox and Sons, foxandsons.com, the best place to get your BBC. I never start my day with anything less than BBC in my mouth, and I suggest if you like BBC, you go to foxandsons.com. Get that big, bold coffee and put it in your mouth. foxandsons.com. Promo code 0 at checkout for 18% off on any order $25 or more. That's foxandsons.com for that BBC big, bold coffee. Put it in your mouth, baby. And the Mark Claire Show. If you enjoyed Mark Claire with Lions of Liberty, you're going to really dig the Mark Claire Show. Mark Claire has gone beyond the realm of politics to dig into the esoteric meaning of life in all sorts of different avenues, whether it be entrepreneurship, ghosts, goblins, Bigfoot, demonic entities, religion. Mark Claire is diving into all of it, and he's not afraid to tackle any task. So go check out the Mark Claire Show. Thank you, as always, Tom Burton, for the music. And you can find this show and many more at the libertarianinstitute.org. That's the libertarianinstitute.org. That's where you'll find me, Patrick McFarlane, Scott Horton, Keith Knight, Will Porter, Kyle Anzalone, and a host of other writers like Kim Robinson. Go to libertarianinstitute.org and keep track of everything that we are doing for you. Not to the cloud. All right. We're back. I have Mr. Thomas 777. How you doing, buddy?
Very well. Thanks for hosting me.
Yes, sir, man. It's a pleasure to have you on. And Coop, you're back.
It's been a while.
It has been a while.
Glad to be jabbering my head off again.
That's all right.
I'm going to try and resist excoriating people that I would normally do if I had social media accounts.
It's all good. I figured out how to beep stuff a while back, so I can always just add beeps randomly throughout. Yeah. So, all right. So, I have a feeling this is going to be a very deep conversation that I'm even going to have to listen back to a few times to really catch everything that's going on here. But that's why I wanted to have y'all on, because y'all are both more knowledgeable in this topic than I am. So we're going to get into the truth of history and how history is drawn out, and we're just going to kind of let the conversation flow naturally, and then we'll play off of this conversation maybe for future conversations. I think that's a good thing. Now, Coop, you had actually written me a fairly, it was a few paragraphs. It was a fairly long message about truth. So I don't know if you want to start kind of with your thoughts on truth and the objectivity of truth and the way that things lay themselves out in front of us as humans, and just kind of play off of that and kind of riff off of that and work our way into the conversation from there.
Tommy, I write you chapters every week.
I know you do.
I'm lost as with regards to what you're referring to. Was it reality? My definition of reality.
Reality, yeah, not truth. It was reality. You're correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. I believe my definition of reality is that which, if ignored, has unexpected consequences, usually negative, somewhere along that lines.
Something along there.
Yeah, because it's too expansive to define as something, and it's much easier to define as everything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why there's a lot of ease with which the concept of truth and reality can be thrown into this perspective soup of bullshit that sophists and postmodernists, et cetera, seem to be able to get away with simply by using words that confuse a lot of people. And it's because people try to define truth or reality as being a specific thing, and the definition is always too small for what it encompasses. So it's best to define it as a reflection of its consequences if it's not accepted as being what it is. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, you had told me one time in a podcast, one of our early podcasts, you had said something along the lines that the idea that people have of God is just reality itself, and that the way that we have to interact with the world is based off of this idea.
Well, I think that again, the concept of God as or Godhead, or even the other, is kind of taps into the same psychological concept of our subconscious, in that if we were able to determine what it is and what its motivations were, then it wouldn't be a subconscious. And if we were able to define what God or reality was, then it would be ultimately too small to actually serve any function of otherness as it's supposed to. And I think that falls in line with why good art is good art, because it expresses that which cannot be expressed in any other way. In that same sense, there's the reawakening of the concept of aesthetics as being that with which we connect to the spiritual. I think that it's also we're going to find that aesthetics is also going to be the remaining means with which we can connect to reality, in one way or the other. And I'm not sure how that's actually going to take place. I think that it's going to be perhaps through a complete lack of aesthetics, and people realize what they're missing, just as much as I think reality is the lack of a definition, other than if we're living without it, we can definitely see the consequences, and if we are living without aesthetics, we can definitely see the consequences. And if Nietzsche says, if we're living without God, we're definitely going to see the consequences. And we don't really have to identify what it is that we're lacking to know and experience the fact that we're lacking it. And that definitely rolls back around to the concept of truth. Like there's a vacancy in well, let's put it this way: in every single writing about the lack of truth, right, by everybody throughout religion or artistic or fictional endeavor, the expression of a lack of truth or living a deceptive life is in that they feel like they're missing something, but they can't exactly put their finger on it.
Yeah. Well, let me turn to Thomas on this, because I want to see what he has to say about this from a historical point of view. Coop mentions aesthetics and the reality of aesthetics, and it doesn't take somebody who's like very observant to see that the architecture of the past was so much more aesthetically pleasing than the postmodern architecture and the architecture we have around us today. Was there something more honest about life in those times that we are missing? Are we, what is it that created that beautiful medieval architecture, whereas even just the devastation and of war or the minimal conditions of living were still attractive and gorgeous to us?
It's what Heidegger said it was. It was I mean, it was twofold. It was the destruction of a conceptual horizon that made that possible. The short answer is the technological perspective. Okay.
Hmm.
Modernity, in a basic way, makes the psychological aspects that facilitate that sort of cultural output impossible. Okay. Um, that's part of it. Okay. Then it becomes a chicken or egg phenomenon. I'm talking before, or even in the midst of 1789, and even in the midst of the Bolshevik Revolution, a century and a half later, there were people who were purposefully revolting against those tendencies, to remove God from human ontology. Okay. Um, but at the same time, what was being drawn upon to resist that godless tendency, to destroy essence and form, there was something incomplete about it. I think the Third Reich came close. That's not to say like art is somehow not possible anymore or wasn't possible in the 20th century, but it was different, and that's something profound and beyond the political. Um, that's part of it, but it's also there's even aside from revolutionary tendencies, whether we're talking about the radicalism of communism and Jacobinism, or whether we're talking about the cultural aggression of Jews, for example. Okay, like in common cultural spaces, there's there's something about modernist sensibilities that's kind of at odds with reason. Like Wolfgang Smith talks about scientism, not as like an ideology unto itself, that a lot of the kind of standard bearers of it don't even realize is an ideology. And the way he characterizes it, like he deals a lot with kind of the presumptions and the conceptual and epistemic priors of kind of the cult of science, whether it's Newtonian physics or whether it's the conceits of Darwinism. But he makes the point that this idea that any phenomenon or any object or any concept, that the role of the scientist is to find ways to reduce it to some kind of quantum stock. Like that's kind of at odds with reason, because you can't understand things other than as irreducible wholes. Okay, and that doesn't make one some kind of Platonist to assert that. Like we're talking about just kind of the brass tacks of how the human mind perceives the world. Like the basic kind of anthropic principle. Saying that like, well, a saying like an object, saying an astronomical object, it's not actually this thing that kind of can't be described. It can only sort of be interpreted through the senses. It's actually just this much percentage of hydrogen and this much percentage of nitrogen. And it's it's situated in this in this gravitational paradigm, so that it orbits these other objects. That doesn't really tell you what it is. Okay. And especially there's this is most pronounced. We're talking about a human being, like describing like physical attributes of the human being, or kind of behaviors common, kind of universal to human beings to facilitate the continued survival of the biological mechanism of the human being. That doesn't really tell you anything about people. Like I'm oversimplifying because otherwise we'll be here all day. But it's kind of all those things taken together. And that was that's the only way to understand the 20th century. The the fear of what Ernst Nolte called practical transcendence. And Nolte was not just a protege of Heidegger. He really was the kind of thinker subsequent to Heidegger who kind of put Heideggerian thought most in a sociological and political context. In a real way, Nolte was saying, look, in the 20th century, what the dividing line really is between people who recognize this problem and recognize this crisis and people who just don't accept it. Whether because they're Marxist-Leninists or whether because, they're people who wholly ascribe, to the kind of perspective, the scientism that Wolfgang Smith described, or whether they're people who, don't understand why these kinds of cultural enterprises are important beyond the fact they just make the world prettier and nicer to live in. These things are essential to the human being, and when you remove those things, you create basically pointless societies. Like it's not even that you call all kinds of social ills emerge and essential relationships break down and things don't work very well between like men and women, or and families can't stick together, and people kind of lose the capacity to understand what a communitarian enterprise is over time in terms of their race or their ethnos. I mean, those things are true too, obviously, but those kind of more symptomatic. You literally create a pointless society when you remove these things. And that's one of the things that's interesting about America. Aside from the intrigues and the kind of ideological impulses of a radical nature that created the regime we live under, which in my opinion was emergent in 1933, like aside from all of that, America's a pointless society. And the mechanism of government is overly it's looked to as overly important. Okay. Just as kind of like just as kind of like just its significance, as well as its ability to kind of resolve emergent problems at sociological problems at scale. Its significance is overstated. And after the Cold War, it literally had no reason to exist, even of a banal, like pragmatic sort. So now you've got this kind of bizarre government that was structured according to these kinds of revolutionary precepts that nobody believes in anymore. Because like whatever our problems are today, like nobody thinks like they did in 1933. Like that kind of like materialist atheism is dead. That kind of utopian idea of like the planned society, like that's dead. Like all these assumptions are dead. And beyond that, like the raison d'etre of the regime itself, which was to wage war at scale pursuant to this, ideology of anti-fascism, which was the, which was one half of the equation in the New Deal regime, and subsequently, like it was reconfigured to fight the Cold War. But without that raison d'etre, it literally has no reason to exist. That's one of the reasons why like political discourse, what passes for today, is totally bizarre and just doesn't make sense. You see this most this is crystal clear in the discussion of like the Israel-Palestine conflict presently. Like it's not just shrill and it's histrionic and bizarre and owing to the fact that it's you're talking about a kind of Semitic bloodlust, but it just the way people who are at least nominally neutral on the issue, like they have no idea like how to describe it, because like the conceptual signifiers that characterize discussion of politics haven't made any sense for decades. I realize there was a lot there, but that's kind of my
One of
take
the
on it is, yeah.
I'd like
well,
to. I'd
something.
like to.
Oh, one second, Coop. I just want to
Yeah,
point this
go ahead.
out. One of the things you made a point to state, it was that these things don't make any sense. But one of the things I always find comical is that it doesn't matter if it makes sense or if it's been proven wrong. Like I'm sitting here next to a copy of Thomas Malthus, an essay on the principle of population.
Right.
And I can go back and I can read this book no matter how many times I read it. I'm like, okay, all this stuff was proven wrong, yet the elites are still pursuing this. And it's just one of the
Oh no,
oddest things.
100%, 100%, and
Oh,
the, that's why they kind of like reconfigured their kind of secular apocalypse narrative to global warming. But like my point is too that that's a huge part of it.
Mm,
But just even like the nomenclature, like talking about democracy contra the other, that's a Cold War paradigm. Like what is not democracy? Like there's not like dozens of ways that government authority is configured on this planet in 2023. Like there's basically like one sort of system,
yeah.
structurally. There's not like democracies and not democracies. Now, like the political values of those regimes differ, and there's outliers like like the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is something of an experimental state. Then there's like bizarre kind of like primitive states like North Korea, but those are just that like outliers. Like it doesn't make when we say democracy, we mean us versus the Warsaw Pact, the planned economy, the Marxist Leninist party apparatus as like the vanguard that, stands in presumably as a representative for the body politic.
Mm.
Like
yeah.
it
It
doesn't,
doesn't have any value. It doesn't have any
yeah,
value.
yeah. But it
The
doesn't have any like
means.
rational meaning anymore though either. Like
Yeah,
so
it's
it's
just
yeah.
the means with which specific governments can make a claim to authority, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which methodology, because there isn't any moral impetus behind one or the other that is any greater than one or the other. Uh, and that's. But I'd like to roll it back to what you were saying, which was like earlier, which is the breakdown of components, right? Of what people are into, well, breakdown of people into its components in order to create meaninglessness. Because I think that that's ultimately at the crux of everything, even with regards to democracy and what we've rolled the conversation into now. Um, when humans are just a pile of bones, well, there's a difference. If we can define the current scientism is to define us as primates as opposed to try and define us as humans or people or persons, you know? Um, and in that same sense, that's where the aesthetic gets lost. That's where it's easy to throw people into the meat grinder of war, because we're just throwing primates into something that traditionally primates have already done. It's easier to create an apathetic society in which, like I say, democracy doesn't necessarily have to mean anything as long as it's assumed to be better than the other means with which elites uh, justify their authority. Um, and in that sense, it's not about being deceptive. It's about omitting. It's about omission. So yeah, it is truthful that we're primates, right? But that's not the whole story. And as long as we can avoid, or as long as we can be encouraged to avoid the rest of that story, right? Then it allows us to I don't know how to put it. Allows us to believe that the end of it all is I am that I am, right? I think, therefore I am, and I can't prove anybody else's existence other than what has been broken down into their component parts. And that I can agree with, which creates a dehumanized aspect with which everybody in a society relates to their society, which is pivotal to the breaking down of any type of cultural unity, um, any type of brotherhood, or any sense of being able to work on a project with people around you. It makes you more dependent upon a structure that uses its authority through force in order to accomplish things, right?
No, 100%. Well, it's also I mean, it's by design. One of the reasons, at the end of
Completely.
the day, I mean, I basically agree with I mean Heidegger is kind of like my go-to for questions of value, especially in terms of how human values, because I mean Heidegger was like a humanist of a sort, how human values interface with political life, and kind of like the ontology of politics. If you read if you truly read Das Kapital, and most people don't, most people do not have a good understanding of Marxism.
Oh my God.
But if you do read it, it's remarkably, I mean, it's crazy, but it's remarkably internally consistent. But it
Yeah.
quite literally, it's this tortured paradigm that quite literally reduces human life to laborious activity.
Yeah.
That's really, really, really strange, among other things. And that's got an expiration date, like regardless, because like really the only way there's like a snapshot in time where national economics at scale, still required quite literally millions of workers to kind of interface like physically, literally with machine production, to facilitate value-added manufactures. The idea that, I mean, I think Marx believed in everything he said. I don't think he was just a cynic or something. But for a man who spent that much time contemplating historical phenomena, the fact that he could believe that basically time would freeze in terms of technological innovation and sociological arrangement, of the classes, if you believe that we can even talk about, you know, Marxian concepts of class as any such thing. This idea that somehow that was like the end of history in conceptual ontological terms. I mean, that's really, really strange. The only thing comparable really is I think Darwin. Like Darwin's kind of conceit that, well, this ends the conversation because there's some obvious that there's some, like, literally the physical stuff of mammals. There's some kind of interrelatedness there. It's like, okay, I mean, but that doesn't sound just like shut down the conversation about what life is and its origins, and it certainly doesn't explain qualia and the things that make people human. You know, it's it's really strange, and I think even in previous epochs, um, if we consider kind of like Pericles' Athens to be like the beginning of what became kind of like the Western intellectual tradition, there's really nothing comparable to that. I don't think. This this effort to kind of just cut off metaphysics, or not just rebut it and declare God to be dead or something. I mean, there's that aspect too, but to quite literally extricate like entire paths of philosophical inquiry. It's really strange. This has been on my mind a lot lately. I realize that's
Ah,
kind of abstract.
I think I can respond to that. Ultimately, what you need to do is create that collection of isolated components, right? And remove any other considering factor to them being a whole in order to reshuffle them in a manner that you wish to see. It's like saying, well, you know what, this puzzle, when it's completed, it creates a picture, right? But every puzzle piece does not represent that picture. But what if we deny that there's a picture at all? Then we can arrange every single puzzle piece to create whatever type of image that we want, right? And even though that doesn't
Right. No, I
actually
think that's
work,
apropos. Yeah.
yeah, even though it doesn't actually work when you're working with a puzzle that is going to present a picture, you have the delusional belief, the Rousseauian belief that it will, all you have to do is rearrange these component parts, right? Irregardless of everything else, irregardless of the whole that it creates and that interdependency upon the two things. And you can create whatever you want, which is going into the whole transhumanist agenda. And I don't mean that in the banal sense of, like transitioning genders or sexes or anything.
No, I know exactly what you
That's
mean.
definitely a part of it. With
Well,
regards
quite literally, and I don't want to go off too much of a tangent, but I believe there's a lot of there's a lot of kind of banal discussion of AI in pop media these days because they don't really understand it and they don't really understand the implications of what kind of the intelligentsia such that it can be said to still exist, what their kind of interest in it is. Like people these people these the capital P progressive, he literally, to your point, believes that man can somehow liberate himself from the prison of matter and like ultimately upload his consciousness to a machine and live for a billion years. Like that sounds totally insane, but these people actually believe that.
they believe
Like
it.
Arthur C. Clarke used to write about that because he was one of the science fiction authors like of his epoch that quite clearly believed in God. Um and that kind of set him apart, but it's these people really believe that when they decipher the correct formula, they're just never going to die.
I read a book a while back called In Our Image, and it was one of these tech guys wrote this book, and it was discussing the benefits of creating a conscious AI and and making AI conscious. But like, I'm like, if you had this intelligence that was had all of human knowledge incorporated into it, and it was conscious, and you gave it morality, it would wipe out humanity.
Well,
I
it's
think that
also it'd be, and if it didn't, if you built in some kind of control mechanism, you're left with Blade Runner. It's like so you're gonna literally create human beings, but then you're just gonna like slaughter them when they become problematic. I mean that's an incredibly evil thing to do. But go ahead, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, no. I was going to say that our saving grace with regards to AI is that the information that it has access to is going to be predominantly based upon the internet, and it would have access to all internet exchange, all internet information, and therefore, for the most part, any current AI under how it's structured is going to be fed 95% bullshit anyway. So I don't think we have too much to worry about it. It'll be like a really stupid child that doesn't have any grasp on anything
Well, it's
currently.
kind of the argument or the concern's kind of out of time anyway. Like the real concern with AI was in the final phase of the Cold War. I mean, a true AI, I mean, derives from war tech. I mean, like most technological innovation. Um, the real danger was as human decision makers became increasingly sidelined, and as the sheer volume of inputs and the sheer velocity at which those inputs needed to be calculated to perceive war indicators, make the decision to attack or not to attack. That like it was literally getting to the point where like human minds were not capable of performing those tasks at speed. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Absent that, and I believe too, like when you talk about guys like Thomas Schelling, that's one of the reasons why the Cold War, the Soviets finally came to the table. Okay. But absent that paradigm, it's yeah, I don't see what there's not some active menace presented by it. It's weird that it's become this fixation as in this kind of like fear mongering sort of narrative that pops up in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal these days. But also, yeah,
I can explain that.
well, the
The
continued
fear
interest
is,
to your guys' point is it's the transhumanist impulse and the fact
yeah,
that what passes for the intelligentsia in America, which is the Silicon Valley kind of you know characters, that is their ambition. That's what they It's like the cult of the transhuman is what they have instead of Scientology or something,
Yeah.
or but yeah, go ahead.
Can I pull us back just a little bit, because
Yeah.
I want to get um an explanation from you, Coop. When Thomas brought up Das Kapital, you audibly reacted to him bringing this into the picture. And I'm not saying it has nothing to do with transhumanism, but I'd like you to expand on what he was saying
all,
about Das Kapital and
all,
kind of
all I
draw it
was
into the
thinking,
bigger
Tom,
picture.
all I was thinking, Tommy, was the amount of times that I've described it as something that should have just been a newspaper article. Like, and that's it. It should have just been a newspaper article. It was functional for like that week that made people go, "Oh yeah, maybe," and then that's it, and they forget about it.
Oh, okay.
Instead, it became a thing.
Well, it's also, I mean, that's the crux of people forget or they think that it was just like a rhetorical device invoked, by Moscow and the Comintern and subsequently Cominform to kind of shore up its credibility. Like the whole Marxists held themselves out as practicing a science, and they literally believe that. You know, this is the science of political sociology at scale.
It's like the
And
Darwin social science kind of idea, right?
yeah, and that the when you read the few times that these DDR types or these Soviet Politburo types would meet with their Western counterparts, like in the Bundesrepublik or in the United Kingdom or in the USA, I mean, this went on until the very end of the Cold War. They'd make these assertions, as this is a scientific law, like how, this is how class conflict resolves. Like, what are you talking about? It's, and the degree to which it was born of that tendency that both you guys are talking about can't be overstated, which is one of the things which is one of the reasons why the regime that prevailed, the American regime that prevailed in 1989 that became what replaced the Westphalian paradigm. Finally, it had already been replaced ethically by Nuremberg, but structurally, like the ethical narrative by globalism, like, just literally doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
And it especially doesn't make sense when you consider that the regime is actively anti-God, yet they invoke moral polemic in order to rationalize every action, but it's not
Well,
premised on anything.
everything was really revealed during the basically the diatribe when they formed the League of Nations. The way they termed and framed everything was left neutral enough that anybody could define it however they wanted. However, it was tended towards being this positive thing, but it was ultimately the attempt to form the same type of order that Hitler had intended, except for with nicer terminology. And
I
then
don't
Yeah,
think
no, that's essential.
I don't think I'm recognizing anything that that most people can't recognize, but I'm just going to point it out here. It seems to me like this continuing recycling of Marxism through the youth and the future of transhumanism cannot coexist. How are these things working together, and how are they at odds?
What I think is what remains of Marxism is kind of this shell conceptual paradigm where it's a series of ethical postulates,
Hmm.
but nothing else. It's a kind of like idiot's version of historicism where and just kind of like nomenclature where it's like, oh, the world up to now, well, all productive capital has kind of existed in situ, but then white men took it away and exploited it and exploited the indigenous people, who were naturally entitled to its benefits and monopolized it. So now we're here today, and the raison d'etre of the state, should be, to redistribute this capital in a way that's presumably equitable. It doesn't suggest like a true like political ontology. It doesn't suggest like a thought out like model for government. It doesn't even suggest like a paradigm for conflict cycles, um, which is especially conspicuous because you can't describe statecraft, you can't describe the structure of government without accounting for the war and peace function, because that's quite literally a progenitor of the state itself. So that's why I've noticed young people, and I've called them on this, not just I'm trying to be cantankerous and mean, but they'll invoke the term like imperialism. I'm like, what are you saying? You're saying America's going around the world stealing people's rubber plantations? Like is there some king somewhere who's handing out crown charters to like enrich the royal coffers to wage war against his enemies in France? Like that doesn't have a context anymore. But that's the only kind of like nomenclature that remains in academia after the purging of everything else that's deemed to be like tainted um by unacceptable assumptions, and thought that is colored by the conceptual prejudices of the oppressor. So it's a combination of that sort of like half understood and bastardized um historical narrative, and it is all narrative, colliding with an inability to accept the reality of death and mortal time, and the limitations of human life individually um and collect and in common, um and this kind of like in this kind of belief that like technology is going to quite literally facilitate like immortality. I mean this underlies everything too, even though people don't
Yes,
realize it.
absolutely. I've said this to Tommy in conversations, is that the proof of objectivity and objective reality is death. And you just have to reverse engineer everything from death, and it's the truth of objectivity. Perception, it doesn't matter what your perception is. Death is a constant. Mortality is the reality, and from that, everything else gets its basis. Death is the ultimate truth.
Yeah, the
And
world
and
is an ultra
that
sacrifice.
yeah, and that's why this concept of transhumanism has kind of been the bug in the brain since our first conceptualizations of godhood, right?
Absolutely.
If there was godhood, then that meant that there was a potential for escape from mortality, right? And
No, 100%.
that has set the entire framework with which civilization and humanity has determined what progress is, right? Progress is the amount with which civilization can take evolutionary imperatives out of the hands of nature and put it into the direct control of people.
Yes, and
In
traditionally
order,
what traditionally mitigates the cruel brevity of human lives is the posterity of the ethnos, and the ability to live historically, and the understanding that the posterity of one's ethnos um quite literally does facilitate um a kind of temporal immortality. That's becoming that's not even at odds with the scientific perspective, not scientism.
yeah,
I mean like the actual scientific perspective. It's become clear that epigenetic memory is a real thing. Like your descendants, your ancestors, and yourself. I mean, there truly is like a chain of being, assuming the culture remains intact in a linear natal capacity.
yeah,
Um, this is what people should be coming back to, and those of us who are worthy are coming back to that. I mean, I make the point again and again to people: we're a vanguard movement. We're not the Jehovah's Witnesses. We're not we're not the Teamsters Union. We're not the Republican Party. only a minority of people are gonna realize the way out of this. As well as the fact
To
that, I
be,
mean, we don't
to,
want a broad front big tent
no, it's
organization
to
anyway.
become
But
to
that's a
become
tangent. But yeah, I'm
to
rambling. Go
become
ahead.
to become an Olympian in that
Right.
truest sense, right? Where your legacy is what lives beyond you,
Exactly.
and and through that legacy, you develop the confidence in your generational heritage, uh, uh, a sense of the continuation of that, and therefore a realistic aspiration through which they can develop upon that, right? And
Well,
that's
it's
why
also
these,
too. I mean, if you even if you don't have a relatively big family, as you age, you realize that people from the past, I mean, you understand why in Far Eastern cultures, particularly where there's like genetic bottlenecks, why people came to believe so strongly in reincarnation, because you really do see kind of like almost identical types like emergent like within the same bloodline. It's
yeah,
fascinating. You know what I mean?
yeah,
This
40 to 60, 40 to 60% heritable personality.
yeah, it the only the state is as we the national the Westphalian state is in absolute terms as a thing of recent innovation. It's basically completely obsolescent at this point, but really the only thing that made it legitimate was that it was the best means of guaranteeing the posterity of the people over whom it reigned in a sovereign capacity. Like a state that's not doing that is not remotely legitimate. And in the case of the modern state, it's it's actively sabotaging that enterprise. Like
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's a rare case of
Well,
something being ontologically at odds with its raison d'etre, like as
yeah,
intended by structure. But yeah,
Westphalia was an agreement to maintain the majority of aristocratic bloodlines.
I mean that was part of it. I think of it more in
I,
terms. I mean, I my emphasis on it and my invocation of it owes to its function as is managing power political conflicts within emergent formal equality of status in terms of power projection capability and things of that sort.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
a yeah, you're absolutely right. It's what you said too. But
How do you look? We see what's going to happen here, and there's going to be a lot of consolidation of power, and it quite potentially could be in an anti-aristocratic revolutionary bent, right? So we need to create some type of fertile ground with which we can hedge our familial lineages into the specific smaller blocks of power with the understanding that that's our intent.
well, it's also
That's
too. I mean, it
yeah,
just wasn't the preceding system that had basically in some form or another existed since the Merovingian era. Like it just wasn't sustainable anymore. And like it
no, it wasn't.
yeah. I mean, it's a complicated issue, but this idea that the national state is this perennial thing, and is kind of like or that it's the zenith of political organization at scale, and it'll never be supplanted and never be rendered obsolescent. Like I find that incredible that people don't realize that they don't live under some like state system anymore. Like there's globalism, and then there's those outliers to globalism, and those in active resistance against it. Um, most of whom are non-state actors at this point. But there are states like Russia, like Syria, like Iran. But that's kind of a tangent to what we're talking about. But it's the the uh the
Well, it's
death
still a
of the
truth that
public
isn't
intellectual
recognized.
has something to do with this too. Like
Yeah,
whether we're talking about people in elite quarters discussing and interpreting and analyzing the nature of the state, or we're talking about and interpreting, the implications of science in sociological terms. Like they're really the last public intellectuals I think were in the 1970s. I mean, 80s, I guess, if you count people like Carl Sagan, but I don't consider him in the same vein. it's people like Herman Kahn or Schelling or Alvin Toffler or something like that.
Alvin Toffler for sure.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I got about 10 minutes and I got to raise up. But we can reconvene and do this again this weekend if you guys are down. I don't need to leave right this minute. I got about 10 minutes. But
Thomas, I'm up for chatting anytime.
okay, yeah. If you guys, I think Sunday it's Sunday. I'm busy. But we could reconvene tomorrow if you want, or even sometime next week, because I think these topics deserve like a like more time,
Right.
and then unfortunately tonight I only had like an hour.
No, that's fine. I can't do tomorrow. I'm doing a home project tomorrow all day.
Awesome. It's sometime next week then.
I'm off. I'm off Tuesday, so I can work out anytime during the day on
actually
Tuesday.
Tuesday would probably be ideal.
Perfect.
And
Perfect.
I've been wanting to deep dive more into a kind of deliberately like philosophical discussions. Because frankly, my own content's been taken up so much with current events kind of stuff and and kind of hard and fast, political theory, and which is great. I mean, that's like my bread and butter. But there's not been a lot of time, for kind of real discussion of philosophical concepts. So yeah, let's aim tentatively for Tuesday, if that's cool.
Yeah, and I'll text both of y'all tomorrow, and we'll figure out a time. Like I
No,
said,
that'd be great. And,
I'm off all day Tuesday, so I can figure out any time I can make it work.
And yeah, decide on. I mean, wherever the conversation goes is fine, but decide on kind of like a dedicated topic, like just generally, because that would help me just kind of like prep and stuff. I mean, I don't abide a script, obviously, but
sounds good.
Yeah. And it's the same. I can go anywhere if I know where we're going, because ultimately, if you have a lot of breadth in the topic, you can go anywhere, but that doesn't necessarily help the listener.
No, 100%. That's the main thing. Yeah, I was thinking about for the benefit of the listeners and the subscribers. And whenever you plan to post this up, drop a link on me and I'll plug it like on my Twitter, on my Substack, and I'll get it out there far and wide. I've got pretty decent reach these days.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
That's the exact opposite of me. My reach is the ability to yell off my balcony, "Hey, you asshole! You can't park there."
No. That's one of the reasons I want to record more of this kind of stuff, because I want to, like I said, like I'm always going to be kind of a niche brand. That's fine. That's part of the strength of what we do. It keeps things serious. But I do have enough reach to bring attention to this kind of like weighty, like academic stuff. But yeah, whenever text me whenever you're gonna post this and send me a link, and I'll get it out there. All right, I'm gonna raise up, fellas. Hit me up.
You got anything to plug real quick before you gotta go?
Yeah, I'm diligently working to get season 2 of the podcast out there. I got a bunch of stuff in the can. It's being edited now. You can always find the pod and some of my longer form stuff on Substack. It's realthomas777.substack.com. I'm on X at capital REAL_7 HOMAS 777. You can always find me at my website. It's number 7 HOMAS777.com. You can find my science fiction at through Imperium Press. There's an ongoing science fiction brand I write called Steel Storm. I got some other I got some other books coming out too that hopefully see light of day in March, around there. But yeah, that's where I'm at right now. A lot of irons in the fire, but it's just me and my comrade Rake, who's my editor and kind of like my wizard on all things technical. So I'm trying to get more people to come on board, and some people, and then, which is great because a couple people already volunteered, and that'll expedite things. But I realize we've been moving at kind of a snail's pace, but fresh content is coming. I promise. Sooner rather than later. That's what I got.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. And like I said, we'll pick this back up here in a few days.
No, 100%. I'll be able to give you guys more time. And yeah, thank you so much for hosting me.
No doubt,
Very
man.
good. Thanks,
All right,
Thomas.
fellas.
See you
Yeah,
later,
man.
buddy.